I am a former psychiatrist, and this is the story of why I quit. After nearly 2 decades of practicing in a hospital in California, I thought I'd seen it all. Every type of trauma, every kind of nightmare imaginable, from soldiers haunted by wartime horrors to people battling inner demons I could barely understand. But last Halloween, I encountered a patient who shattered every boundary of what I believed possible, and since then, I haven't been able to shake the fear that follows me. It was the end of October, the hospital was quieter than usual, and most of my regular patients had canceled their appointments, probably preparing for the holiday. The sky outside was already dark, casting long shadows down the empty hallways, and my shift was winding down. That's when a nurse, Gina, poked her head in to tell me I had one more patient. She looked unsettled, and Gina was usually calm as a stone. "Dr. Larson, it's a walk-in. His name's Matt. Looks like he's been through something bad," she said, glancing nervously back toward the waiting area. "You sure you want to take him? Bring him in, Gina." I sighed, thinking it would be another routine session. Maybe a man struggling with a midlife crisis, or a guy who'd lost his job and his way. I was wrong. The man who walked into my office was in his early 30s, wearing a tattered jacket, his eyes dark and distant. He looked drained. I gestured to the chair across from me, and he sat down, clutching his hands together so tightly his knuckles went white. "Matt, right?" I asked, trying to keep things casual. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" At first, he didn't respond, just kept his gaze locked on a spot on the floor. Then, after a long silence, he began to speak in a low, raspy voice. He told me he'd been having trouble sleeping, that he felt he was losing touch with reality, and couldn't tell what was real anymore. "Why do you feel that way?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, my usual technique to show interest, to make people open up. I didn't know it then, but I was about to regret asking him that question. Matt took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "It started 2 weeks ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd wake up in the middle of the night, same time, every time. 4:20 a.m. I thought it was just stress at first, you know. I'd go to the kitchen, get some water, and try to sleep again. But then I started hearing things." His voice trembled as he continued. "I started hearing these soft footsteps in the hall outside my bedroom. They were light, like a child's, and I figured it was the house settling or, I don't know, maybe just in my head. But then one night I saw her." I tried to keep my face neutral, but I couldn't help feeling a prickling at the back of my neck. "Saw who?" "A little girl. She was standing in my hallway, right outside my bedroom door," he said, shivering slightly. "She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with these big, dark eyes and this doll clutched in her hands. She looked straight at me, document. And then she spoke." His face paled as he whispered. "She said, 'Get out of here and give me back my dad.' Just that, over and over, like she was chanting it, her voice all low and wrong. Like she'd been practicing those words for a long time." A chill ran through me, but I kept my tone calm. "And this happened once or—" He shook his head. "Every night, document. Every single night for 2 weeks. She'd just appear right there, staring at me, saying the same thing in that hollow voice, 'Get out of here and give me back my dad.' I even tried switching rooms, sleeping in the guest room, on the couch, but she always found me." As Matt spoke, his hands started trembling, and he clutched at his jacket, looking around the office as though expecting the girl to appear right there in the shadows. I had heard plenty of tales from distressed patients before, but this was different. Something about the way he told it, his eyes darting around, his voice almost breaking, made me feel a strange unease I couldn't shake. "Matt," I said, clearing my throat. "Sometimes, when we experience trauma, the mind creates manifestations. It's a way of trying to process feelings we can't face directly. It doesn't mean they're real." He looked at me, his expression almost disappointed. Like he expected that I, of all people, would believe him. Then, he reached into his pocket. "I know how that sounds, document, believe me. I tried to tell myself the same thing. he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. But this is real. And with that, he pulled out a small doll and set it on my desk. The doll looked like it had been through hell. Its faded pink dress was torn, one eye was missing, and the remaining one stared up at me with an empty, glassy gaze. It was an old-fashioned, wind-up kind of doll, the kind that was popular decades ago. The moment he set it down, I felt an icy chill run down my spine, like the temperature in the room had dropped by several degrees. Matt, I started, trying to sound calm. Why are you carrying this doll? His eyes were hollow as he spoke, like he was already somewhere far away. This was hers. I don't know how it got into my house, but I found it lying on my bed one night after she disappeared from the hallway. I tried throwing it away, burning it even, but every morning, I'd find it lying right next to me when I woke up. I was about to respond, but then there was a knock on the door. It was a soft knock, barely more than a tap, but it sounded like it echoed in the small office. I glanced at the door, expecting Gina or maybe one of the night staff. But when I looked back at Matt, his face was as white as a sheet. He was staring at the door, frozen, his eyes wide and fearful. The knock sounded again, this time more insistent. My heart started to race, and I rubbed my eyes, trying to pull myself back to reality. When I opened them, Matt was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. I looked around the room, half expecting him to be hiding in a corner or standing behind me. But there was no one. Only that broken doll, lying on my desk. And that's when I saw the words. Scrawled across my desk in a messy, jagged script were the words. Get out of here and give me back my dad. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at those words, unable to move, unable to breathe. Finally, I forced myself to leave the room. I stumbled down the hallway, feeling the walls close in around me. The lights seemed dimmer, shadows lurking in every corner. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. I haven't set foot in that hospital since. But every now and then, I still hear that soft knock in the dead of night, and I wake up with the words echoing in my mind. Get out of here and give me back my dad. I don't know who, or what, that little girl was, or why she appeared to Matt. But ever since that night, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, looking for someone to hear her, someone to bring her father back. And sometimes, I worry she's looking for me. My name is Emmy, and I lost my best friend because I didn't go on a trip with her. Sometimes I wonder if she'd still be alive if I'd gone. Maybe I could have stopped her, or maybe we'd both be lying there in that Arizona desert. Anyway, this is Mia's story, but it's also mine. Mia and I had been close since kindergarten. She was fearless in ways that would leave you shaking your head, and she had this spark, this wild curiosity about everything. I always thought she'd end up somewhere grand, like trekking in the Himalayas or scaling a mountain in South America. But last spring, she got obsessed with going to some remote canyon area in Arizona, near the Colorado River. She talked about it like she'd been dreaming of this trip for years. The place was supposed to be beautiful, untouched, raw desert. But there were rumors, weird old legends that locals whispered about. Stories said the land was guarded by an uncontacted tribe, a people who hid from modern society, people who did things to protect what was theirs. The few stories people dared to share were enough to make you shudder, like folks disappearing or going insane after seeing things out there. But Mia? She'd just laugh and shake her head, calling it all superstition. Come with me, Emmy, she kept saying. You'll love it out there. It's practically calling me. But I didn't go. Work was nuts, and honestly, I wasn't thrilled at the idea of camping out in some ghost-ridden canyon. So, she packed up and went alone. She called me when she first got there, all cheerful, talking about the brilliant sky and how the colors of the rocks looked like they'd been painted on. Emmy, this place is unreal. It feels like stepping into another world, she said, her voice echoing over the crackling line. I told her to be careful, to maybe keep her exploring to the daylight hours. But she just laughed. That was Mia. She'd dive into the unknown with that wild grin, like life was all one big dare. The last message I got from her was a voice note, the day before she went missing. She sounded different. It was still her voice, but lower, almost like a whisper. Hey, Em, it's weird here at night. Sometimes I feel like I'm not alone, you know? Like there's something watching me. She laughed, but it sounded forced. I think I'm just spooking myself out. Anyway, I'll call you tomorrow. Don't worry. But tomorrow came and went, and there was no call. 2 days turned to 3, and then her phone went straight to voicemail. Her parents and we started calling ranger stations, local authorities, anyone who might help. A week passed with no word, and by then, we all knew something was terribly wrong. The search lasted 2 weeks. Rescue teams combed through the desert, braving brutal heat, rocky cliffs, and narrow canyons. People from all over the area volunteered to help. I joined in, of course, even though I was terrified of what we might find. Part of me kept hoping Mia would just stroll out of the canyon one day, sunburned and hungry, laughing at how everyone had overreacted. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel something was wrong. When they finally found her, it was like a punch to the chest. They found Mia's body tucked away in a small ravine, hidden from the trail. Her tent was shredded, half buried under a pile of rocks as if someone had tried to hide it. But here's the thing that still makes my skin crawl. Her body looked untouched, like she just laid down and closed her eyes. But her face, there was a look on her face I'll never forget, like she'd seen something too terrible for words, something that had frozen her in fear. The rangers said it was heat exhaustion, dehydration maybe, but they looked spooked too, like they didn't believe it themselves. There was no sign of trauma, no signs of struggle. She was just gone. They found her journal nearby, and I'll be honest, I didn't want to read it at first. I wasn't ready to see her last thoughts, to get inside her head during her final days. But something kept pulling me back to it, like a force I couldn't shake. And when I finally opened that journal, what I found was stranger and darker than anything I'd imagined. The first few pages were normal, full of excited notes about the landscape, her thoughts on being out there alone. But a few pages in, her writing changed. It got messy, the words scrawled like she'd been in a hurry or couldn't keep her hands steady. I've been hearing noises at night, she wrote. Sounds like footsteps, but softer. Sometimes I think I see figures just at the edge of the firelight, but when I look, they're gone. The entries got darker, and she began writing about dreams, nightmares that left her sweating, feeling like she'd been watched all night. In one entry, she wrote, There's a woman, or something that looks like a woman. I see her standing just beyond my tent every night, but she doesn't move. She just watches. The last entry was what really did it. I could barely bring myself to read it, but the words are burned into my mind. I'm not alone. I can feel them all around me now. They whisper, but I can't understand them. I don't know if they're real or just in my head. Tonight I'm going to find them. I have to know what's out here. I'll be okay. I'll be okay. I'll be okay. That's the last thing she wrote. She never came back to her tent that night. Sometimes, when I lie awake in my room, I swear I can feel that same chill she described, like something's watching, just out of sight. I can still hear her voice in my head, her laugh, her excitement. And I can't shake the feeling that if I'd gone with her, maybe things would have ended differently. But it's too late now, and the desert keeps its secrets. I've had enough. I'm not doing what I love anymore. For years I ran a little pet shop downtown, and I genuinely loved it. Seeing the joy on kids' faces as they picked out their first hamster, chatting with people who wanted a companion, helping folks find the perfect pet, that was my life. It felt like I was doing something good, giving animals a safe place until they found the right home. But last October, everything changed. I haven't been the same since. It was a chilly Wednesday, right before Halloween. Business was slow, so I was reading through the news on my phone while finishing my coffee. That's when I saw an article that made me feel sick to my stomach. Some underground lab in the area had been experimenting on guinea pigs, innocent, little creatures tortured in the worst ways you could imagine. The article didn't hold back on the details either. The poor things were injected with who knows what, and most didn't survive. The thought of any animal going through that kind of pain made my skin crawl. About an hour later, this man walked into my shop. He was tall and thin, with greasy, unkempt hair peeking out from under a battered old cap. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, and he had this unsettling, fixed look in his eyes that put me on edge immediately. But you can't judge someone by appearances alone, so I gave him my usual friendly greeting. "I'm looking to buy a guinea pig," he said, his voice low and gruff. Normally, I would have just nodded and shown him over to our guinea pig section, but that article kept playing in my head like a warning. Something about him didn't sit right. I felt this sharp, protective urge, like there was no way I was about to sell any animal to this man. So, I looked him square in the eye and said, "Sorry, sir, but I don't think I can help you with that today." His face changed in an instant. He went from calm to furious, his mouth twisting into a snarl. "Why not?" he spat, glaring at me like I'd personally insulted him. "It's store policy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just want to make sure our animals go to good homes." He let out this low, bitter laugh. "Good homes?" He reached into his bag, and my heart stopped cold. I had no idea what he was going to pull out, maybe a knife or something worse. But what he actually took out was almost more disturbing. He plopped 3 guinea pigs onto the counter, right in front of me. They were in terrible shape. Their fur was patchy, and they were barely moving, like they'd been through hell and back. Their eyes were glassy, lifeless. I gasped and instinctively took a step back, every fiber in me screaming that something was very, very wrong. "See?" he said, grinning in a way that made my skin crawl. "They're just fine. I take good care of them." Those animals were anything but fine. I reached under the counter and hit the button for security, my heart racing. Within a minute, 2 of our store guards appeared, and I explained what had happened. They escorted him out, and the police took him in for questioning. Later that day, I found out that he was tied to the experiments in that underground lab. He'd been picking up guinea pigs from pet stores all over town, testing on them like they were nothing more than disposable toys. I was shaken, but in some way, I was relieved. At least I hadn't sold him more animals. I thought that would be the end of it, that he'd be locked up, and we could all move on. But I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, I got up, poured my coffee, and tried to shake off the memory of that man and those poor, mangled guinea pigs. I convinced myself it was over, that he was out of the picture. I was wrong. When I arrived at the shop, Gina, one of my coworkers, greeted me with a nervous look. "Susan, that guy, he's back." I froze. "What? The guy from yesterday?" "Bud, the police." She nodded, her eyes wide. "He's here. He's been asking to speak with you." My heart started pounding. I looked across the store and saw him standing there by the counter, hands stuffed in his pockets, his greasy hair hanging over his eyes. He looked even more unhinged than before, like he hadn't slept all night. Against my better judgment, I walked over to him, keeping a good distance between us. "I don't know how you got out, but you need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't move. Instead, he looked at me with that same eerie intensity, then slowly pulled something out of his pocket. I braced myself, but it wasn't a guinea pig this time. It was worse. It was a small, clear plastic bag, and inside was a finger. A human finger, pale and shriveled, with what looked like dried blood at the end. My stomach turned, and I had to fight back the urge to gag. "I'm not here for guinea pigs today," he whispered, his voice low and sinister. "I'm here for something a little more special. I want a piece of you." I felt the room spinning. He took a slow step forward, a twisted smile creeping across his face. "Just one finger?" That's all I need. I think it's only fair, after what you did to me. You ruined my research. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a shaky step back, glancing over my shoulder, hoping one of my coworkers was nearby. But the store felt empty, the usual bustling noise replaced by an eerie silence. I managed to find my voice, weak as it was. Get out of here, or I'll call the police. His smile faded, replaced by an angry sneer. Go ahead, he hissed. But I'll be back, Susan. You can't stop me forever. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving the plastic bag on the counter. I stood there, frozen, until Gina ran over, her face pale with worry. I pointed to the bag, barely able to breathe, and she gasped, covering her mouth. After he left, I called the police again, and they assured me they'd look into it. But even after they took the bag and promised increased patrols around the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting. I quit a week later. I couldn't stay there, knowing he might come back. To this day, I still jump at shadows, afraid I'll turn around and see that man with his twisted smile, holding out that bag and asking for just one finger. Some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear his voice whispering in the dark. I'll be back. And every time, I wonder, what if he really does come back, looking for me?